definitely not least, another excellent cognitive linguist, if Lakoff and Johnson had their say in the field of metaphor. Langecker is another big name in the field of cognitive linguistics, and this guy has closely cooperated with Henryk, so he has a lot to say about cognitive linguistics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Three things that are connected, that are related to this title. So, excuse me. Yeah, I'm going to talk about where the grammar is viewing metaphor. Essentially, I'll be talking about profile and base. Then I'm going to talk about the linguistic sign, that is semasiology and onomasiology in cognitive linguistics. And also I'll be talking about the latest theory, Linguistic's latest theory, which is based on the idea of baseline and elaboration, organization. And I'll be talking about the dynamics of the linguistic sign. That is the dynamic constructive nature of the linguistic sign. And I'll be using some examples from morphology in the examples. So grammar is viewing, and that is in morphology, that is profiling and profiling of morphological structure. Now, what you see here just three figures which relate to the idea of the figure and ground. Figure and ground. Now, this is the basic principle which underlies our perception of reality, our understanding of reality. So now the point is that now the figure and ground, which is a purely conceptual psychological notion, in fact underlies grammar. That is decisions that we use when using linguistic structures. So the structure of linguistic units is determined by conceptualizations resulting from figure-ground segregation associated with attention. In cognitive grammar, a figure corresponds to a profile, while the ground to the profile's base. On the left-hand side, so what you see on the left-hand side, you can see now it's a classic example of what our perception is all about. So you can see either two figures, right, or you can see a vase, all right. And then in fact now the point is what do we see here, right? And now using now the so if you see a figure, that's if you see a vase. Okay, so the vase becomes the figure, and the ground is the two profiles which you do not see. If, let's say, if our attention is to some sort of, if you pay attention involuntarily to these profiles, so these profiles become the figure, and now the rest is the ground. And we use the same thing in grammar. Well, in morphology, take a look at. So if you take a look at the conceptual organizational conceptual structure of the verb break, you can see that now the verb break profiles a process. A process is actually, it consists of a number of stages. Now here you have three stages of process, and these stages now go through time. So, and now because well, break is a relational figure. It's a process. You have two figures. One figure is trajectory, the other is landmark. But the most important thing is that if so, the conceptual organization of break is that our attention, actually, we pay attention to all the elements of the process plus time, because it is through time that the process, let's say, evolves. In the case, if you add now the suffix, or the past participle suffix, en or id, then you have the forms such as broken. Now this is what you get. Now the composition, the conceptual composition, well, changes now, and we focus on the last stage of the process. Former stages are right in the base, but we pay attention to the last process. And then what is involved here is the so-called scanning, right? Scanning. In this case, in the case of break, we have so-called sequential scanning, which means that we follow the say one stage after another. In this case, it's the so-called summary scanning. So now notice that I'm using cognitive or psychological terms such as scanning, but at the same time, you can see that I'm linking now those terms now with grammar, with morphology here. Look what happens if let's say if the past participle form in fact is used. So the relationship, you can capture the relationship in conceptual terms between these two forms, in terms of break and broken, in terms of scanning, and in terms of profile and base. Now, in the case of break, the profile is the interior of the space. In the case of broken, the figure is the last stage of the process. It is the last stage of the process, whereas that's the figure, and then the base is the remaining parts of it. Now, let's take a look. This is actually, you can also use the idea of figure ground in the case of syntax. Okay, in the case of syntax, so you can see what happens here. Now, if you had a sentences such as Floyd broke the glass with a hammer. The hammer broke the glass, and the glass broke. So you might be interested what now these sentences have in common, right? And then, from a conceptual point of view, you can account for the relationship between these sentences. That's between the syntax here. You can account for it in terms of the figure ground organization that applies to the so-called energy chain. Energy chain is a representative. Actually, represents an event. The event that is used either by generative grammarians, or the term is very well known to generative and cognitivist grammarians as well. So here you have an event, and in an event you have we have participants of an event. Could be like agent, instrument, and patient. So here they are. Then you have energy flows from an agent through instrument and to the patient. And now it all depends now where our attention to what part of the chain, the energy chain, what part is profiled. If the entire chain is profiled, now this has a very important consequences, syntactic consequences, grammatical consequences for linguistic structure. So if the entire chain is profiled, then look what happens. Agent becomes the subject, instrument becomes an agent, and patient becomes an object. And now the energy flow is coded by the verb. In this case, the verb break. In this case, now notice what happens in this case. If, let's say, if only part of the chain is profiled, that is, if we pay attention, as it were, to this part, then the instrument, which is the hammer here, becomes the subject, the patient, that is the glass, becomes an object. Okay, and then finally, if we pay attention to the last part, so the last part of the chain, then this is what happens. The glass becomes the subject. So you can see now how the one and the same cognitive principle, the figure ground organization, which in cognitive linguistics, cognitive grammar translates as figure and ground. Okay, figure and ground, which is which is directly related to the figure and ground is connected with profile and base in cognitive linguistics. So now, that is the idea which is behind the profile and base and profile and base. Now, another part of the lecture I'm going to talk about is the Saussurian linguistic sign. And the point is that this is what Lange says about Saussures' linguistic sign. Language is symbolic in nature, says Lange. It makes available for the speaker, for other personal or communicative use, an open-ended set of linguistic signs or expressions, each of which associates a semantic representation of some kind with a phonological representation. Now, this is what he says. I therefore embrace the spirit of classic Saussurian diagrams, well, like figure 3.1, okay, with the understanding that explicit substantive characterization is required for the elements they depict. So, cognitive grammar is firmly based on the idea of Ferdinand de Saussure's idea of the linguistic sign. Now, this is the linguistic sign. Of course, now you can see now that in fact, now this is this is the signified. This is the signifier. This is the signifier, and now here is the direction, as it were, from the signifier to the signified. Now, this is what semasiology is all about. Semasiology deals with polysemy. In this case, if you start with a signified, and if the direction is from signified to the signifier, this is the direction which is connected with synonymy. With synonymy, and this is what onomasiology is about. Onomasiology is the act, it has to do with naming. So onomasiology, if you use synonyms, you name certain aspects of conceptual structure and also of meaning. Now, in this case, if you start with a given expression has a number of meanings. Now, this is what semasiology is all about. So you could have, for example, a tree. You can have a different types of trees, but you also can have generative tree, right? Generative tree. Let's now move on now, and then you can see what it means. I mean, for Lange to say what it means that Lange's cognitive grammar is based on the linguistic sign. Now, Lange talks about the bipolar nature of linguistic units. Now, that is the so-called semantic space, or the semantic pole of the linguistic expression, or this is the phonological space, phonological pole of the linguistic expression. So clearly now this is modeled on Ferdinand de Saussure's sign, right? Ferdinand de Saussure's sign. Now, and of course now the semantic space, it could be a word here. It could be a phrase, or it could be just a sentence. Now, this is how so Lange extends Saussure's idea of the linguistic sign goes beyond actual words. But the question, an interesting question, is what is the relationship, right? What is the relationship between the signifier and the signified? And the relationship is quite complex. Now here you have the semantic, that's a conceptual structure, and also a semantic structure, which is sort of equal. Well, in cognitive grammar, here you have the phonological structure, and you can see now that the relationships between the semantic and phonological poles. So you have the composition, okay, the composition. Now this is the relation of composition. The relation of integration, when two things actually will integrate, like jar and lid. And lid, you can see that actually happens at the two. Both at the semantic pole and the phonological pole, and finally we have a symbolization. So as a result, you get a structure. You get a structure which you cannot get rid of any of these relations. If you do, so you will have destroyed the sign. Well, Derrida will probably be doing this, but we are not interested in that. Now, in cognitive linguistics, what is important now? A very important claim is made that about the continuum of language areas of language units. Now, this is what actually happens. Now, the lexicology, morphology, the syntax of that can be thought of as being immersed in conceptual semantic structure. This is a very important claim, made by Lanak and also by Dibben and Fishbaugh. And this is what it means, in practice, so to speak, about this continuity of linguistic units. Let's start with the very bottom of this. Now here you have a semantic or cognitive structure of the instrumental case, which in Polish is coded by the instrumental ending m, where stu is obviously also a table, and then stołem, together you have this sort of integration, and then now this integrates with pod. Pod is under is the preposition, and then it goes even further. Then you have puka, which means ball. The ball under the table. So you can see now here you have a continuum of linguistic units. You start with a case, you go to a morphology. So this is inflectional morphology. Now this is a sort of a derivational morphology. Now this is a phrase, a syntactic phrase, and then you can go on and say John puts now the ball under the table. Right, so it could be still further developed, and this is in fact what is meant by the meaning of an instrumental case. Now this is what the instrumental case is all about. Now that's the meaning, and this comes from Janda, and the Janda says that a nominative close to an instrumental acts on an accusative in a setting. And then he puts the ball under the table. So if you go back to it, you can see now this is what you can see here. And this is so because you can ask. So how do we know what the meaning of this instrument is? And now this is, you can put it in a context now. The instrument has a number of meanings. And now this is one of the meanings of an instrumental case. If you have a concrete instrumental, like for example, he cuts the bread with a knife, so here you have it with a knife, and you have it under the table, you can see the difference. I cannot dwell on it any longer, but anyway, now this is what. In fact, we can say that the meanings of the instrumental case form a network of interrelated meanings, of interrelated senses. Then you have the meaning of the so-called dativus ethicus, the ethical dative. And this is a sentence like this one: do not dare to join any party on my account. Where you have me here is the dative. It's a very special kind of dative. And now the function of the dative, especially in Slavic languages, I think it is this one. The use of the ethical dative is largely subjective, that is pragmatic. It's a device employed by the speaker to capture the hearer's attention. the speaker maps the case relationship by the above schema onto the speech act domain using the dative sphere to claim the existence of a relationship between the hearer and the narrated event. The speaker projects this sort of a dative relationship onto the interlocutor in order to involve him in his narration. Now, clearly now this is a case of pragmatics, right? So now you can see now that syntax, semantics, and pragmatics form a continuum of linguistic units. And now, especially now, pay attention please, to this one. The speaker maps the case relationship by the above, and then the speaker projects this sort of a dative relationship onto his interlocutor in order to involve him in his narration. Now the question is how to involve the interlocutor in one's own narration. And this is how you can do it. I'm not going to discuss this in greater detail. Now this is the so-called current discourse space. It's a space established between the speaker and the hearer. The speaker and the hearer. In which, in this space, the meanings and concepts are negotiated between the speaker, and the hearer. And this is how, using the dativus ethicus, the ethical dative, the speaker tries to involve the hearer into his orbit, as it were, and induce him to participate in the conversation. So I actually now what I'm saying is that you can anchor, as it were. You can anchor now what I've just said into this very general current discourse space of Landke. Now. The second part of my talk was about onomasiology and semasiology. So semasiology is about polysemy. It's about polysemy, and this is how the polysemous meaning of the er suffix looks like. The er suffix, the meaning, and if you add a stem to the er suffix, you have a number of different meanings. The prototypical meaning of the er suffix is human agent, like where you have baker and teacher. And then you have experiencer. Experiencer perhaps is the less, which is less prototypical meaning. Then you have human possessor, and then you have purpose or passion, and so on and so forth. And all these will be the peripheral, perhaps, meanings of the suffix, of the er suffix. So this is how polysemy is handled in cognitive linguistics. It is cognitive grammar, cognitive linguistics. So Hunter and Tom now give this kind of network of interrelated senses that they are connected with the er suffix, and this is actually what happens. So that was the suffix er, and this is the stem. This is the stem like hoof, right? Hoof has a number of at least two meanings. Hoof is the ungulous or vaulted part, and then you can also use derogatively hoof. In order to refer to humans' foot, right? And this is what, again, semasiology is all about. So you have the hoof, and then you have at least with two meanings, that is the ungulous vaulted part, and then you have a person's vaulted part. So this is, right? So hoof means hoof, and hoof can mean foot. This is what semasiology is all about. And so, and then you have all these relationships that hold in the case of the meaning extension of hoof from foot. Let's go on now, and this is what you find here. You find here now the Polish, and I believe in the Slovak you also have the nik suffix, and it has a number of meanings, right? It has a number of meanings, and the nik suffix forms again a network of interrelated senses. So you have przewodnik, you have guide, and then a guide as a person, a guide as a book, and then you have the nik, which is used as a kind of you have zakład, and then you have nik, then you have zakładnik, which means a hostage, And then you have, well, śmietnik, which is the rubbish place where you put rubbish. But what is actually important here, you can see a similar hierarchy. The hierarchy you have the most perhaps important meaning of NIC is the agentive meaning, then you have instrumental meaning, and then you have patientive meaning, patient and locative. And you may ask, where does this hierarchy come from, right? And then, and this hierarchy again comes from the familiar way of representing the event. Okay, so the agent is perhaps the most important. So the NIC, which makes use of the agentive meaning, should be the most important meaning. Then you have an instrument, then you have patient. What you've got here is all of these now the transactions, as it were, of the energy flows in a setting. And whenever you have a locative derivative, such as, for example, śmietnik, this is the place where things are put. In fact, now this is the very, very low on the hierarchy. But again, it comes from the idea of the event being represented in this way, in the form of the chain. Now, onomasiology. Onomasiology, that is the act of naming, parts of the signified, and this is actually what happens. You use the term Hoover to point to those things that happen on the as it were, cognitive plane. So it's a potential human agent, okay, in this case, and then you will see all sorts of cognitive operations. So the operation, the using of ER, if you add ER to hoof, then it stands in the metonymic relation to the hoof, to the stem. And look what happens actually when the stem is used hoof. It is the body part which stands, body part hoof stands for the body part foot. Now this is a metaphor, and the body part for the activity, this is metonymy. That's the metonymical part. Now, so this is what actually happens as the signified part. Now, onomasiology is about actually naming now those categories. Now, and what's those categories? I mean, in fact, are named. So you have things where like whole part, a set element, and then you have those examples like leg of a table, the Dominican of the person of the Dominican order. You have number, size, intensity. All these things, in fact, are singled out by different aspects of linguistic structure. So these are onomasiological categories, or cognitive categories, as Jakubowa and Szymanek call it. But what actually Professor Paweł Sztekauer now actually makes now the whole thing actually more fine-grained. In fact, now he uses different types, different levels to which structure categories. Now this comes from Sztekauer 2005. So here is the hierarchical organization of onomasiological structure, and you can see those different levels. When using a particular linguistic structure, you name those levels, you refer to those levels. And then you have from Janda again. Now that's from Czech, then Czech stem and information. So služba, service, služebník, servant, and then you have abstraction, where stands for entity, located for location, material for agent. Okay. Now, if you use a blend, such as, for example, with glitterati itself, so what does it name, right? This is what you're talking about onomasiology. So it aims, it names a certain sort of people. Let's say it comes from glitterati, comes from glitter and literati. Okay, so there are two concepts as it were merged. So you have the concept of glitter, you have the concept of literati, and as a result, glitterati, you name a sort of people who who are literati, but actually for the purpose of showing off. Actually, if you want to show off, so this has the meaning, just right in the blend, you get the meaning, which is not in either of these, so-called input mental spaces, and the meaning is a little bit derogative. Literative is positive, but you say gliterative, then you have the meaning. The meaning is somewhat derogative. And now, so actually, now this is what actually happens at the semantic pole. In order to get the meaning of literati, you have to combine conceptual two concepts. You have to mental spaces, and then only some of these. And what you've got here, you have a very important part of the a concept, which is ostentation, to show off, and you will not get in any of these in this, right? So and this is the idea of a blend. In the blend, you very often you get information that is neither of the blends on the input blends. And this is actually what happens at the phonological pole. You also have this kind of blend, some kind of little merger. In this case, it's swushtika, which comes from two concepts. One is swastika, and the other is swoosh. Swoosh is the Nike, that is the firm Nike, which produces the shoes, is the logo. And then if you combine them, you get the swushtika, which is supposed to mean that firm Nike looks behaves like now this totalitarian Hitlerian regime. And this comes from Susan Hemmer, 2003. And now finally, we have that is what I'm going to talk about, but it will take me just 10 minutes, maybe 8. Now, the idea, the point is how to dynamicize the Saussurian sign, right? The Saussurian sign is not dynamic at all. You have the signify and the signified and the relationship between the two. So what is needed is that some kind of dynamic boost, to it. Now, because and now the idea actually comes from Lanaka, and now there's a series of lectures. Now, Lanaka was in Poland, has been in Poland several times, and 3 times in Lublin. We have published his lectures. And in case of 2016 series of lectures, he says this: structure is often identified with grammar and function with meaning, or structure with lexicon, morphology, syntax, and phonology, and function with things like semantics, pragmatics, and discourse functions. And this is really a kind of disguised metaphor. It's a manifestation of the substance-activity distinction, which I think is ultimately wrong. So in other words, what he says that that the signifier and the signified, the Saussurian signifier and signified, now this distinction, it's actually a manifestation of the substance activity. Substance, that's phonology. Activity, now that is the meaning. That is the meaning which is assigned to this substance. And this is what he says. It's wrong. So you have to look at substance and activity and the signifier and signified as one whole, right? Now, and the substance-activity distinction is wrong, he says, because the formal elements are substantive only metaphorically, and because phonological, lexical, and grammatical structure consists in patterns of processing activity, just like meanings do. And with patterns of processing activity applying at all levels of conceptual organization, where a structure of any size consists of inorganized activity, structure versus function is really just a matter of perspective. So it's just a matter. It's just a matter of perspective. So now the question you can easily now if you have it's a matter of perspective. It all depends on the figuring out organization, and then depending where our attention where you place our attention, this is you focus either to a greater extent on signifier or the greater extent on the signified. Right, so it's just a one whole. So what is structure? A structure is a configuration in which entities or elements are connected via three types of connections. They overlap in the activity comprising the interconnected elements, associations such as one structure tends to activate in another, and operations like comparison, categorization, assessment of relative position in some field. And connections produce new entities which represent a higher level of organization. Well, okay, a higher level of structure which results from the process of grouping can be presented as follows. So here we have the, so what is it? Actually, it's a cognitive, it's a cognitive, it's a picture of the cognitive processes which take place when you group things, when you group entities well together. All right, now this is what it is all about. Now the schema function while categorizing relationships. So you can see now that in a structure you have different exponents like A, C, and B, and they form a system, and then all of them are organized, actually are determined by the function. Function, which means essentially meaning, that is the signified. And then you have here inhibition which directly corresponds to the figure ground organization, but this inhibition is a purely conceptual process. This is presumably how our mind and brain actually works. So some structures are, some concepts are inhibited, which means they are hidden, right? Hidden, and some other things. If you hide more things, just like a metaphor, you have hiding and highlighting, and this all of this is based on the idea of the figure ground organization, essentially profile and base. And here you have so you have different meanings of the er suffix, and then these are instantiation of the schema, er schema, which they are determined by the er schema function, right? And then you have those different meanings of those instantiations of the er suffix. Okay. So the schema function based on categorizing relationships between the various senses of the er. All right, and then I'm sorry. Now these are not my things. Actually, this is Lanaker's things like baseline and elaboration. But I have to introduce this. So, the notion of baseline and elaboration was pertain to asymmetries. What I'm trying to do, I'm trying to dynamicize the sign. Dynamicize the sign. And most probably I will be dynamicizing myself. Anyway, so the notions of baseline and elaboration pertain to asymmetries observable in any facet of language structure or its conceptual phonological basis. The baseline B is already established in some sense, right? In place or under control. Its elaboration, E, by augmentation, adaptation, or further processing, produces a structure that may itself function as B at another stage. And then you say, what is B? Organization has thus a temporal aspect, B in some sense B prior to E. Now these are definitions given by Lanaker. And now let's move to B organization involves layering, an arrangement in terms of column periphery of strata, where each stratum, SI, is a substrate for the next stratum, SY plus 1. This is actually what happens. So you have the base, then you elaborate this base. For example, so you have the stem, such as, for example, paint. You elaborate paint, you add the ER, and then you have just painter. So paint is the stratum S0, and then if you combine it with the ER, then you are in S1 stratum, and the E means elaboration. And then you have different elaborations here. Of those who have different meanings, for example, of the instrumental, different meanings of the ER suffix, right? And then you can see what actually happens. Ways of elaborating a baseline, the layering of state of okay. And now derivation category and derivation type. I think it is useful. It is useful to introduce now these this distinction at some point. This is we are talking about still onomasiology, so we use now different suffixes here, like er and e and so on and so forth. For example, to call an agent noun, agent noun. and I'm about to finish now. Okay, so this is in fact now what I've tried to do. I have tried to combine the polysemous aspect of morphology, of the sign and morphology, but different meanings of the ER. And now, okay, so this is this part is semasiology. This part is polysemy. You have different meanings of the ER suffix. Now you pick out now a particular agented professional human agent, and now you actually use different co-functional suffix to name this professional human agent. So this kind of extension is the onomasiological extension. And now, and then perhaps you recognize that you have type 1, type 2, and type 3. Why now it can give now substance to Schumann explain why he would use now this kind of numbering here. Why should agent be at the very top here, and then this kind of a derivation at the very bottom, and then of course now it has to do with the energy chain. So yeah, you can go back onto the energy chain, and then you will see that the professional human agent is the. In other words, if you profile now agent here, just from in this energy chain, then you get now this professional human agent. If you profile this part, this is going to be instrument. This part now, this is going to be patient. Now this has to do again with semasiology. But if you start naming the professional human agent using now those different co-functional suffixes, you're firmly in the onomasiology aspect. Thank you very much.
Professor Henryk Kardela. So we have time for one question.
You're giving a lot, and I think I'm finding it difficult to grasp it. So, one thing is the model you think I should base a model that, in my eyes, is already very powerful in the sense that it describes a lot. And now that neuroscience it, is there anything that you predict that is not existing? Is there any prediction of what should not happen in life?
Yes, it's an extremely important actually question. Yes, because it has to do with the constrainability. Is this grammar, this model somehow constrained? You see, the thing is that it's an important question, but for cognitivists, I mean, it's very important. I mean, for Chomsky's, generative grammarians, for Chomsky's camp. Okay. It's all about now. They've been keep talking. I mean, they've been talking about constraining grammars, and of course they linked it. I mean, to the way language is acquired, to language acquisition at some point. Now this of course this has changed now. I mean, but now so the thing is that yes, it is very powerful, and I agree. I mean, and now I can give you an example of how powerful it can be. And I've been talking. I've talked about with Susan Kemmer some examples relating to morphology, and then the model. In fact, you can say no. It's over-generating using the generative term, because you can. The point is, I mean, Kemmer uses this. Then it uses the conceptual integration of blending in relation to blends. But now the real question is, how can you prevent, now this kind of mechanism from applying to derivational morphology? Because now the thing is, well, how can you conceptualize now the meaning of ER, for example? So now the question is absolutely valid. And now, but probably this problem, most probably but could be or would be, in fact, downplayed to say that this is not the major concern of cognitive linguistics, constrainability, right? And then, well, in fact, if you read now, okay, the volume 1 of Foundations of Cognitive Grammar by Linguistic, so he devotes 30 or so pages, I mean, to the critique of Noam Chomsky's grammar, where all the ideas of languages based on logic is in fact is rejected, things of the sort. So I should, I'm worried. Yes, I mean the point is now the model is too powerful, because of course if you're working with the current discourse space, so why not actually apply it, and then attempts have been made to apply it to Van Dijk's, for example, where again you have the that is the critical discourse analysis and things of this sort, right? But so there's always a price to be paid. Okay, if you want to have a global picture of linguistic structure, then questions of this sort are absolutely inevitable, right? But yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.